In this episode, I'm joined by Gregory Blann, mystic, artist, author, and initiate into the Inayati and Halveti-Jerrahi orders of Sufism. Gregory reveals the rich history and practices of Sufism, including meditation techniques, Zikr, and the dream practices of the Halveti-Jerrahi. Gregory also recounts his own spiritual journey, from Evangelical Christianity to Gurdjieff to encounters with great Sheiks of the 20th century, such as Pir Vilayat Khan, Sheik Nur, and Muzaffer Efendi. Gregory also explains the 4 levels of religion, connections between Sufism and Kabbalah, and discusses the possibility of an allegorical reading of the Gospels. So without further ado, Gregory Blann. Gregory Blann, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You're a Sheik of the Halveti-Jerrahi Order and a long-standing member of the Inayati Order also. And you've had some really remarkable teachers, and I'd like to ask you about them and about your path in quite some detail. But actually, I think it would be interesting at the beginning if we could talk a bit about Sufism in terms of its history, its practices, and how it sits within the wider context of Islam and world traditions. You've written several books on that subject, on the history of Sufism, including 2 volumes on the history of that tradition, The Garden of Mystic Love, volumes 1 and 2. So can you talk a little about Sufism in terms of its history, practices, and how it sits in the wider context of Islam and world religions?
Sure. We often define Sufism as the path of love or the path of the heart. And so whereas when people think of Islam, normally they think of the Shariat and the 5 times a day prayers and the fasting during Ramadan and the various rules like that. Sufism is the Shariat is called the main road of the religion, and the Sufism is called the Tariqat, the path that leads off of that into the more mystical understanding, or the path of the heart. One way that I think is helpful is to remember the Sermon on the Mountain, where Jesus said, "You have been told an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you, you must love your enemy." That's the Tariqat, is that path of love and generosity and beauty within Islam. But it can be defined much broader than something within the annals of historical Islam. Even in Islamic Sufism, they say the first prophet or the first person to receive the message of the divine was Adam and Eve. And so, and then of course, Abraham is the father of the 3 religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And so he's also considered, Islam is considered to be like the religion, the pure religion of Abraham, before the Mosaic law and the time of Jesus and the historical Muhammad. So Sufism is most broadly defined as wisdom, the pure wisdom that flows to all of the religious traditions. And it was very active before Islam in the Neoplatonic philosophy. And so we call it the perennial wisdom sometimes. And so Sufis would identify with that as well. And so I am a member of 2 different orders that have a slightly different orientation to Sufism. One is the Inayati Order, used to be called the Sufi Order, or Sufi Order in the West. And those teachings go back to Hazrat Inayat Khan, who was the first one to bring Sufism to the West. In 1910, he brought the Sufi message. And at that time, he he saw that people were kind of Islamophobic, so to speak. So when he talked about Islam or the Prophet Muhammad, people didn't have a very good reaction. And so he chose to veil Islam in a more, in its most universal clothing. And in that way, he came from India, where the cultures already merge, and often Hindus and Muslims meet together in worship. And so Hazrat Inayat Khan introduced Sufism to the West as the universal mysticism of all the religions. And so the practices in the Inayati Sufism, which has several branches now, have really emphasized both like Buddhist and yogic meditation, breathing practices, the Zikr, which is a special form of remembrance in Islamic Sufism, and practices from the Hesychasts to the Desert Fathers and Mothers of Christianity, and so on and so forth. And there's even a worship service called the Universal Worship, in which all of the scriptures are put together on one altar with candles lit for each of them, and the scriptures are read, and then there's a sermon that kind of ties together what do all the religions say about a particular topic. And often there's also, it's adorned with music and even dance, spiritual dance, which is also part of the tradition. It's not technically looked upon as dance in a kind of frivolous way, but sacred movement. And so Sufism, I would say love and wisdom are the two really poles of Sufism. In Islamic Sufism, then you get more into the container that was developed after the time of the Prophet. He had various companions who were kind of mystical in nature. And one of them, Hazrat Ali, was the one we consider the father of the mystic tradition. And that Muhammad, peace be upon him, transmitted many of the mystical teachings of Islam to Hazrat Ali, and then it was passed from student to student, and what's called a silsila, or a chain of transmission that flows through the centuries down to the present. And so, for instance, as a sheikh, I received what's called an ijazat. It's a little scroll that has, I don't know how many names, maybe 30 generations of teachers from the Prophet down to my own sheikh. And so the after the time of the Prophet Muhammad, it took a couple of centuries before the scholars of Islam codified the sacred law and issued. There was many. There was 4 main schools of jurisprudence who decided what were the fundamental rules and teachings and moral guidelines of Islam, and what did the Prophet say, and what is in the Quran. All that's drawn. At the same time, the mystical schools developed, and both of these appeared around the 10th century, the beginning of the 10th century, particularly in Baghdad. There were the first Sufi schools appeared that were Islamic Sufi schools. And so one of the things I would point out is in my book, Garden of Mystic Love, I realized that there was a progression through time of the teachings. And so the very earliest Sufis, Islamic Sufis, were kind of gruff ascetics who denied the body and were very much sort of like yogis, fasting and doing a lot of things to become literally the poor in spirit and giving away everything they had and so forth. And with time, various Sufis appeared who really began to bring out the love element. And there's a famous martyr named Al-Hallaj, who was actually martyr of love in 10th century Baghdad. And then a very wonderful woman saint, Rabia al-Adwiya, shortly after his time, who was symbolically depicted as carrying around a torch and a pail of water through the streets of Bursa. And they said, "Oh, Rabia, why are you carrying these?" And she said, "I would like to light a fire to heaven and pour water on the fires of hell so that all the believers become lovers of the divine for the sake of the divine and not for the hope of heaven or the fear of hell." And so she said the divine love is so much greater than the kind of paltry thing we make of it as sort of a desire for paradise, some kind of personal escape from reality, something like that. And so there was this blossoming of mystic love. That's why I entitled the book The Garden of Mystic Love. And that comes down to the modern times. And one of my sheiks, Muzaffer Efendi, who is the 19th sheik of the grand sheik of the Halveti-Jerrahi, was a great lover. And he was really known for the love that he inspired in people. And when he came to this country, sometimes he would go on the radio and people would call and want to argue about some atrocities that had happened in the past in Islam. And he would say, "I'm not here to argue about blind men fighting blind men. I'm here to talk about love and the possibilities of humanity reaching its full potential." So that's how I would answer your question about how I see Sufism.
That's very fascinating. I'm curious in, I suppose, both your experience and historically, common layman's understanding of these two paths, the main path and the mystic path.
The path of Tariqat, yes.
Yeah, that seems to be a dichotomy that's read into all kinds of religious contexts. It's read sometimes into Christianity. It seems to be present in Judaism, certainly we can see it in the Old Testament, this sort of two strands, and sometimes they're working together, but more often than not, there's some conflict. It can also be seen perhaps in Indic Tantrism, that style. So I'm curious what you think about that, if that's a bit of a simplification, or if that's a reading, or if that's a view that you resonate with at all.
Actually, there's 4 levels that we find in most of the religions. There's the Shariat, which is the base level, the literal level on which the scriptures are taken. And then there's the Tariqat, which is the heart level. And then there is the Marifat, which is the mental level, which has to do with our mental paradigms and the way of realization. And then the Hakikat is the absolute truth beyond all religion, beyond all forms, and it's the complete formless dimension. And so these 4 levels, we find them in yoga and in Kabbalah and in Sufism. And I go into them extensively in my most recent book, When Oceans Merge. And so as far as the main 2 that people think of, Shariat and Tariqat, in the Halveti-Jerrahi order, when this question has been asked, the answer is that there is no wall of separation between these two. They are complementary. They go hand in hand. But the tariqat, the Sufic understanding goes to a deeper level, and so it's the same. In Sufis in Islam still do all of the 5 pillars of Islam, but they have they may read between the lines more and are not so literal. And so allegorical and symbolic understanding of reality becomes much more important. And so it's the same Quran, the same sacred scriptures, but a different level of hermeneutic applied to it, and a deeper level of the heart. And so it's really the difference between the outer manifested rules of the religion and the spirit, like St. Paul makes that distinction between the spirit and the letter of the law. So they do come together, and then some people put walls between them. And I think that's putting up a false dichotomy. Certainly, Sufis don't want to be associated with violent interpretations of Islam, like jihadist rhetoric that interprets various scriptures to advocate violence. And we find that in the Old Testament as well. And so for the Sufis, those first of all, many of those in the Quran, those problematic passages can actually be interpreted in a if they're put back in their original context, they are far less warlike than what some of the extremists imagine.
Could you give an example of one of those problematic passages, the way it could be read in an extremist fashion, and how you might read it differently if you contextualized it?
Absolutely. There's a scripture in the 9th chapter of the Quran, which is known as the verse of the sword. And when it's taken out of context, it says, go fight to slay the idolaters wherever you find them. When you go back and look at the context in which it was said, it is talking about the Prophet Muhammad made peace treaties with various tribes. And these treaties allowed for people to live at peace. And of course, the Arabs were a very warlike tribe. And so they depended on these peace treaties to be kept. And some of the tribes went back on their word and broke it. And there was a time when the nascent Muslims were fairly vulnerable, and they were being attacked by the people of Mecca, who rejected the Prophet Muhammad because his way really represented an end to the organized religion that they were so invested in. And when they attacked some of these tribes who had vowed to stand with the Prophet, turned and attacked from the rear, and they barely survived this. And so this verse is talking about, it says, keep the peace with those who have kept their peace treaties, but the ones who have turned their back on the peace treaty, you must stand against them and be prepared to find them and kill them wherever they are. If they attack you, you must retaliate. And so, and then it adds, interestingly, it says, but those who offer peace again and vow not to attack you, you are obliged to stop fighting them and make peace. And if you find them injured on the battlefield, it's incumbent on you to lead them off to safety. And so there's this kind of chivalry that is really the more accurate understanding as the Sufis understand, the inner jihad is also meaning that we are battling with our own selfish nature, what the Sufis call the nafs al-amara, the instinctual animal self, which is by nature very selfish and puts self first, and is problematic for our spiritual unfoldment. And so the Sufis look at the jihad not as going around looking for outer enemies, although those must be addressed if they're attacking you or they are a threat. But the inner jihad is really the important thing too. And Hazrat Inayat Khan especially had a very interesting take on the inner jihad. He said, this idea that you must kill the ego or annihilate it somehow is not correct. It is more like the relationship of a person to an unruly animal, like their horse. You must train it to serve a higher purpose, and so that the lower self must become the servant of the higher self. And so that you establish the master within. And so nothing is killed. You can't actually kill the ego. The ego doesn't really exist. It's a relative conception or formation. And that's, of course, part of the Sufi path is the training of the nafs or the ego, or which let's call it the conventional self or the historical self. And so that's really where the Sufis go with that. But on the outer plane of fighting one's enemies, Islam has a directive that says that it's incumbent upon you to forbid evil when you see it, and do good. And so let's say you were walking down the street and you saw, someone being attacked or something. It would be incumbent upon a Muslim to try to break that up and stop it, and not to just walk by and say, well, it's their problem. And so that can be taken on a national level to say, we must pursue justice. And then it comes down to kind of subjective, almost egoistic decisions of, are we going to be, like, for instance, in American policy, do we want to be the world's policeman, or do we stay out of other people's affairs? And so that comes down to, I think, to personal a judgment. And so Islam also has it's not completely rule bound. There's also the something called ijtihad, which is your own spiritual insight. And so it is incumbent upon people to seek the inner divine guidance and come to their own decision, what their soul feels actually is just, rather than mechanically looking to outer directed rules. And so there is a place for individual initiative and discretion. There's something that in the Middle Ages, at some point, the ulama, the jurists, had completed all of their formulations of the sacred law, and they said, we're closing the book of jurisprudence. After that, no one else can come back and change it. And in our times, we're seeing Muslims saying, I don't accept this, whoever said they closed the book, because we have to update these things in every generation. And so we're reopening it. We're reinterpreting things in order to make something relevant for our times. We're not riding around on camels anymore. We have to face that fact and see what is the spirit of Islam and how does that work. And so, for instance, Muzaffer Efendi, when he came to this country, he came from Istanbul in Turkey, where Ataturk had closed down the Sufi orders and really inhibited Islam back in 1924-25, about the same time that Stalin was cracking down on Orthodox Christians in Russia. And so Sufism has been actually technically illegal ever since then in Turkey. And so it kind of had to go underground, and Muzaffer Efendi opened it up to a certain extent. And when he brought it to America, he fell in love with the American ideals of spiritual liberty and protections of that everyone had the right to worship in their own way. And he said, this is exactly what Islam actually is teaching, because Islam has this doctrine of the people of the book, that all of Christians and Jews and actually all of the prophets, the Quran says that this message of unity and love has been brought to every nation on earth. And so there's no people that haven't had their own prophets or sages who have revealed the divine truth in their own time and culture. And so Islam actually is universal and accepts these others, although many people in Islam don't have a really clear understanding of that, and they may even speak against Christianity and Judaism and not realize that they're violating the real spirit of Islam, which is very universal. The problem is that people, limited egos, come in and narrow down religious teachings. We see that across the board in all religions, and so the Sufis are always trying to dig down below the surface and get that water of life that is pure and renew religion, and to make it vital and get us back in touch with the real source of our being.
And that kind of perennialism is something that your main teachers in particular have emphasized. So would it be fair to say that you would see the conflicts that people see between the Tariqat and the Shariat are not fundamental conflicts between those two paths, but conflicts in the interpretation of those two paths?
The question is, do I see a fundamental conflict between them?
I'm trying to summarize what you said and saying that this commonly cited tension between the Tariqat and the Shariat paths, or the mystic and the religious, as it's sometimes cast more generally, you don't see that as a fundamental conflict between those paths, but more a conflict of interpretation by different groups.
Yes, and for instance, in the 18th century, the followers of Abdul Wahab took over Saudi Arabia with the help of the British, and they took it back from the Ottoman Empire and spread the teachings, more fundamentalist, we could call it. That's not really the technical term for it, but teaching that they went around and destroyed Sufi shrines and so forth, and they said that Sufism was illegitimate. It's something foreign to Islam that was added, was imported from somewhere else, and so this became the prevalent interpretation in Saudi Arabia, and then in the 1920s, when they became very oil rich, they began to export that all over the world. And so this narrowed down kind of Shariatic interpretation has taken root all over the world in the mosques of America and so forth. And so for hundreds of years, for the centuries, especially during the time of the Ottoman Empire, it was a much more open and there was many of the sultans of Ottoman Empire were members of Sufi orders, and so from the point of view of the Wahhabis, or the Salafis is what they call themselves, they see themselves as going back to kind of a purist Islam of the 7th century, and trying to do everything exactly the way the Prophet Muhammad did it. And it's there's, for instance, there's no record of the Prophet Muhammad ever eating watermelon. So they say, well, it's against the Sharia to eat watermelon because we don't think the Prophet ever sanctioned it. And these are the kind of absurd things you get when you become very literalist. And so there's this doctrine in Islam that you cannot add anything to the religion. It's called bid'ah. It's like you're innovating. It's this cardinal sin. And so the Sufis aren't so worried about that. They don't. First of all, they're reinterpreting. They don't see it as adding anything foreign. They're bringing out the true spirit of love that is in Islam, and it's others who may have a more narrow point of view from the Sufi perspective. And of course, you can have sectarian Sufis as well. It takes all kinds, but I'm speaking from the most Sufis are fairly broad in nature. And so when one of my sheikhs, Sheik Nur, was asked this question about the Sufis versus regular Islam, he said, well, think about St. Francis. If you went to and asked him, what is it you're doing that's different from Christianity? He would say, what are you talking about? This is the soul of Christianity. I'm living it. And so that's very much the same. It's kind of an analog to what Sufis are doing within Islam, but Sufism can be within all of the religions. And like I say, this fourfoldness of reality, the four worlds, really does shine through in all the traditions, and we see definite correlations there.
That's fascinating. What, if any, connection do you see between Sufism, the spirit of Sufism, and say Indic Tantric thought and practice?
Well, that would have been a good question for Sheik Nur, because he was really a deeply studied practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, and went deeply into the tantric teachings. And so the tantra tends to be maybe a little, it can have a physical aspect of tantric lovemaking or something, which would be a little accepted by the Sufis on a more metaphorical level. There's a level in which the soul and Lord merge into the supreme identity. And so I think that's where the commonality lies, that there's this union. And so the analog of human love is very much like this this union of the feminine soul with the masculine energy of the divine. Even though that's not to say that the divine has any gender. I don't want to suggest that. But I'm saying Islam means submission. Some people have problem with that word, but it's sort of like sugar melting in water or something. It's the soul finding its true home and sort of melting into love, and so it's not a harsh thing where you have to cut something off, and it's more like love making. And so the Sufis call God the beloved. And much of the Sufi poetry addresses God, oh beloved. So the more Shariatic Muslims think that goes too far. Is how dare you say God is lover? That crosses the bounds. But that's really the way the Sufis relate to God. There's all these different metaphors that we can use. We kind of in our Western culture, we've thought of God the Father as and maybe a king sitting on a throne somewhere, ruling over things. But there's other metaphors that we can explore, such as the beloved and the divine mother, and the feminine energy more and more is being brought out in modern Sufism, because the patriarchy has kind of suppressed the feminine. And we go back to the time of the Prophet Muhammad, we see that he was very much opening the doors of freedom for women. And a generation or two after him, they brought the curtain right back down and went back to the old patriarchal interpretations. But one of the Prophet's wives, Aisha, is said to have transmitted 50% of the sayings of the Prophet. But the scholars only used about 13% of what she transmitted. So this God as mother, as the one who nourishes us. There's a famous saying that a prophet said, "Paradise lies at the feet of the mother." And so there was this real reverence for the mother, and we can think of Mother Earth and the whole movement of ecology that can be buttressed by becoming more and more in touch with our feminine side and the feminine nurturance. The Quran speaks of God always as Rahman and Rahim, and this Arabic word, the root word Rah, means womb. And so God is like the mystic womb of creation, and the creation emanates forth just like a mother would give birth. And there's no separation. It's not like God is a carpenter that hammers together creation out of wood or something, but it's emanated out of itself. And that's very much like Brahman assuming the different forms of created beings. And so we can see the whole world as a manifestation of divine grace and divine beauty, and that the world itself is full of the divine signs, sort of like seeing the tracks of a bear in the snow. We realize that the glory of a sunset and the vastness of space, all of these are signs to show us that we are living in divine reality. It's like St. Paul says, in God we live and move and have our being. That's the motto of the Sufis as well.
That's fascinating. One of the ways in which I've heard Tantra, Indic Tantra and Sufism compared is in terms of the different levels of meaning, the layers of meaning, the hidden and secret meanings, also the role of transmission and of the guru, of the merging of one with the guru. Its guru yoga practices seem to be, at least at first glance, some shared practice there, or some shared method, I suppose. I'm wondering if you could give an example of a classic practice that people would associate with Islam that the Sufis also do, but see it, as you say, reading between the lines, or might see it more allegorically or metaphorically.
Yeah, I think the what is called Zikr, or remembrance, divine remembrance, would be the quintessential practice and a good example of that. So the Arabic words are La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah. And so literally the first word La means no. And the next phrase, Ilahi, means no divinity or no gods exist. So it's saying the first half of the statement says, no gods exist. And then it says, illallah, except the one being, Allah, in Arabic. Of course, Christians also say Allah for the divine. So it's saying nothing exists except the one being. And so that from the Sufi point of view, well, let me give you the literal point of view. All the other gods are fake, and only the national god Allah of the Arabs is the real McCoy. So that would be the most limited possible understanding, and it's a little like the understanding that many people might attribute to that in Islam. But for the Sufis, it means nothing exists, including one's own ego or separate selves. So we can use the analog of physics to see in quantum physics. We know that when we get down to the subatomic level, no individual particles exist. There's only waves and the sort of turning of the subatomic particles, and so reality is a little bit like that. If we look, for instance, at the turning of a propeller blade, we see what appears to be a circle, but when it stops, we see that it's simply the motion in time that gives us that sense of something solid. And so our bodies on the physical level are really not solid, and our mental conception of who we are is also a transient formation that has no real reality. It's just a relatively real, let's say. And so when the Sufis say, La ilaha illallah, ooh, they're saying, no, the world is, as I see it, is a kind of maya, an illusion. It's not the way that the ego believes it is. And then illallah, only the divine exists. And so we exist as expressions of the divine. But because we are conditioned to accept a very limited belief in who we are, we have an exaggerated sense of the otherness of God, and believe that we are simply finite creatures and could not possibly house the divine immanence. But for the Sufis, God is both transcendent and immanent. And so Sufism is full of these paradoxes. And so this statement, La ilaha illallah, is really a kind of no-yes dichotomy. And there's even in English a zikr of opposites, where you could say yes and no, and dark and light, and tall and short. You go on until, and you start, if you start saying, and long and short, and so on, that and starts to become the conjunctive, integrating those two, and you see that they're not so separate. They're like two poles of one reality, or two sides of a coin. and so the world of opposites is actually a part of this greater unity. And so this practice of Zikr, La ilaha illallah, is bringing us back to unity, back to our true reality, and kind of breaking through the veils that hide the divine light. And then we, as on the path, we began to discover this divine light within. In Orthodox Christianity, it's called a theosis, sort of the divinization. One of my teachers, Reb Zalman, Schachter-Shalomi, was really a strong advocate of Teilhard de Chardin, and he had this idea that the whole creation was progressing toward a divinization of the universe, that we're meant to discover our own divine nature. And so this dichotomy that we have the limited, obviously we have the limited human nature, and no one's denying that, but there's also this secret glory that we also manifest, but we are unable to accept it at first, because it just seems contrary to people say, what do you mean you're God? You know, and so Sufis don't like to just state it so baldly, but say nothing exists but divine reality. La ilaha illallah. That's the Sufi creed. And so that's the same creed for Shariatic Muslims and for Sufis. And also, I should say, remembrance is also remembrance of our true nature and our true heavenly birthright. One of my teachers, Pir Vilayat Khan, used to speak of the cosmic celebration in the heavens. And he said, we're lost in our problems and storms in our teacups, and we're forgetting the big show, the cosmic celebration that is happening all around us. And so he advised, attuning to this acts of glorification in which we would really begin to get in touch with these divine qualities in ourselves. And actually in Islam, this is another whole area of practice, is the divine qualities, the divine names. And so there are 99 names listed in the Quran, and there's many more names, but we consider these qualities that the human being is composed of. And so while the divine being remains transcendent of the creation, it's said that the creation is composed of the divine attributes of love, of power, of light, of majesty, of humility, compassion, and it's all of the opposites. It's not just the gentle, nice names, but also the very powerful forms of the divine. We have all of these inherent in our being, and part of the path is to bring these from being recessive to really shining forth, and so that's another aspect of the path.
Fascinating, thank you. Let's change tack slightly and talk about your personal story. I'm curious about your early life. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about your upbringing and how it was you first became interested in these things.
Yes. Well, I was born into a fairly religious family. They were evangelical Christians. I had a paternal grandfather who was a pastor of a Wesleyan church in upstate New York, and a maternal grandmother who founded the first rescue mission in Nashville, Tennessee. And so I went to church regularly and so forth. I can't say that I always enjoyed that, but I early had was imbibed, I think, with religious feelings, and I think there's a kind of a soul level. Sometimes we're born into the family that is right for us, and so during adolescence, I began to sort of become more skeptical of the theology of the church, and began to read books like on the quest of the historical Jesus and things like that, higher biblical criticism, to try to get at the actual historical foundations of what was being taught. And by the time I got to college, I had kind of decided to just set religion aside, and it was the end of the sort of hippie countercultural movement, early 70s. And so I went to Peabody, Vanderbilt, and I was getting a music degree with an art minor, and I was hanging around with kind of countercultural types, and so I went through this period of being kind of cool and rebellious. But it didn't take too long, maybe 5, 6, 7 years before the soul was kind of calling me to a deeper understanding of life. And the first spiritual teachers that I related to back before the days of cable TV and internet, we only had 3 networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And one of them actually played a film of Alan Watts giving, it was one of his late lectures in California. He was out in the mountains behind his home in California. And it really spoke to my wife and I. So I started reading Alan Watts books, and at the same time got into teachings of Jiddu Krishnamurti, and so that really spoke to me. And of course, Krishnamurti really talked about going beyond the traditions and also going beyond thought, and so that one really came to unity in this way by going beyond the limited thought forms of the ego. But after a while, I moved to Boston and was into the sort of the jazz scene, seeing all the old masters, Dizzy Gillespie and people like that, and so Allen Ginsberg giving poetry readings, and attended a Sri Chinmoy concert. But it wasn't until I moved back to Nashville that a friend of mine, I am an artist as well as a sometimes musician. And so a friend of mine commissioned me to paint a large portrait of a man I'd never heard of named G.I. Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff was an Armenian philosopher in the early part of the 20th century. And so it was his wife was doing this for his birthday as a surprise. And she said, here's some of Gurdjieff's books. You might want to read them, see who he is, who you're painting this portrait of. And I was very interested in that. And the next thing I knew, my friend Joe Naft, it turned out he was leading a Gurdjieff group in Nashville, and he had attended a course on the work with John Bennett, who was one of the students of Gurdjieff in Sherborne in 1974, just before Bennett died. And he had also gone to Istanbul and met Sheik Muzaffer at Bennett's recommendation. And so he was leaving this group, and he needed a pianist to perform the piano for the people doing the sacred movements. And so he asked me if I wanted to play the piano for that. And so I joined the group and started playing the piano, and I was fascinated by the movements as well, and the quality of the music, which was very Oriental sounding music that, let's say, it had something built into it that really touched the heart, or some deep remembrance of another reality. And so I got more interested in the Gurdjieff work, and there was a local group that was associated with another one of Gurdjieff's students named Pir Vilayat in Claymont, West Virginia. So I went there for a few kind of week-long or weekend type of workshops. Pretty soon, I found out that Sheikh Muzaffer from Istanbul was coming to Claymont to visit with a number of his dervishes. And so my wife and I made the trip there and spent a beautiful weekend with Sheikh Muzaffer. And so that was the first Sufi teacher, Sheik, that I was introduced to. And he was a very expansive, beautiful being, and so we were really impressed by the presence of this sheikh. And I remember thinking at the time, if this is what one Sufi sheikh is like, this is going to be amazing if I start meeting others. And so at the time I didn't know much about Islam, and so he was kind of an Islamic Sufi. And he only spoke Turkish, so I had to speak through a translator. He led us in the ceremony of Zikr, which is a huge circle of concentric circles. And one of the students was the son of the Sheikh of Konya, Mevlevi, who does the whirling dervish, the whirling, and is called the turn or sama. And so in the Zikr that we did with Muzaffer Efendi, there was hundreds of us all in a circle moving around the sheikh, and also this dervish or turning in the center. And of course, the symbology of that is that it's like the planets turning around the sun. Or the sheikh represents the spiritual sun, or the sustenance, just like the guru would in the Eastern traditions. And so that was a really, I began to read much more on Sufism. I wasn't ready to take initiation at that time, because I just hadn't checked out sort of what were the different options available. And I didn't foresee traveling to Istanbul a lot to confer with a Turkish-speaking sheikh. And so came back to Nashville, and shortly thereafter, a friend of mine that I'd known for years, who had moved to Georgia and was getting his master's in psychology down there, told me about another Sufi group, which was the Inayati Sufism. They were called the Sufi Order in the West at the time. And he was doing, there was a lovely couple who was leading what they called Sufi dancing. It's actually called the Dances of Universal Peace. And he invited us to come down and join and do that with him. So we came down, and these dances were created out of simple folk dances by a student of Hazrat Inayat Khan named Murshid Sam Lewis. And he lived in San Francisco. He was actually an old man by the time that this came through him. He was in his 70s, shortly before he passed away, but he had received divine guidance very strongly, that God spoke to him and said, I appoint you to be the spiritual leader of the hippies. And the idea was to give them spiritual food to help them have something besides just drugs. And so he began to, go to Golden Gate Park and lead these dances. And they were very simple steps, things that anyone could pick up quickly. And a chants of Shri Ram, Jai Ram, or Allah, Allah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, the merciful, the compassionate, Kyrie eleison, Namo Amida Butsu. So people got a little taste of all these different traditions, even the Zoroastrian tradition, and the Taoists and the indigenous people. All of these eventually were brought into the dances of universal peace. And so when we went down and participated in these, it was such a loving community, and I had been sort of closed off for many years, and kind of cool and aloof and sort of intellectual. And this really represented the opening of the heart. And I immediately recognized that I had found a kind of spiritual home with the Sufis because of this opening of the heart. Really seemed the path for me. And so some of the Sufi dances are partner dances where you look directly into the eyes of people and say something like, from you I receive, to you I give, together we share, from this we live. And we're seeing we're directed to see the divine light in the other person and really experience that. And there's a lot of hugging and intimacy. And so that was a real freeing sort of energy for me. So January 1980, I heard that their spiritual teacher, Pir Vilayat Khan, was coming to Atlanta. And so I went down to see him for a weekend. He was a master of meditation, and I could say lots of good things about him. But I immediately recognized that this is the person I want to take hand with. And so I went to a summer camp at the Abode, where they have a sort of headquarters at an old Shaker community in upstate New York, and received, my wife and I both received a bayat, or initiation into the Sufi order, the Inayati Order, from Pir Vilayat. And so that was my introduction into Sufism. And so I quickly started a study group in Nashville, where I lived at the time, and still live there, and started inviting these spiritual teachers to come to Nashville and give weekends. And we actually got Pir Vilayat to come at one point, and a lot of other teachers. And I started, for the next 10 years, I was traveling all over to Sufi conferences, and it wasn't just Sufis, but they would bring all these healers and teachers from different traditions. And so Swami Sachitananda, and I first met a Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi, who was a Kabbalist, who Pir Vilayat had made a sheik in the Sufi order. and he could speak both Kabbalistically and in Sufi language, which was a great uh, a draw for me to really see someone who was combining these traditions. And so later I actually wrote a book including him and Pir Vilayat and the way that they it turned out they actually initiated each other into the tradition. And so all these teachings of the four worlds and so forth are brought out in that book.
That book is When Oceans Merge, your 2019 book.
Yeah, contemporary teachings of Pir Vilayat Inayati Khan and Rabbi Zalman Schachter-Shalomi. Yeah, yeah. And so at the, to continue the story, I've already mentioned that, of course, Hazrat Inayati Khan was the teacher behind Pir Vilayat. He was the son of Hazrat Inayati Khan, and very much teaching this. So Hazrat Inayati Khan's teachings, it's all on the internet now for free. But originally it was like in 12 what they were called message volumes that contained all of his lectures. And they're put in very modern English in a way that's very easy to read. It's deceptively profound. Pir Vilayat he likes to, or he did, like to bring in modern physics and things like that. And some of his writings are a little more intellectually oriented, and yet his whole life mission was really to continue the work of his father. And so that tradition was very rich. I'll say just a little bit more about Pir Vilayat in passing. I failed to say that when I grew up, my father was in the Army, and so the first 10 years of my life, we traveled all over. I lived in the Southwest and the Southern United States, the Northern United States, and in a town near Paris for 3 years growing up. And so I always have this affinity for France. And so Hazrat Inayati Khan ended up living in Sérènes, which is a suburb of Paris. And also Gurdjieff lived in Paris toward the end of his life. And so this is another draw, as well as the fact that Hazrat Inayati Khan was a great Indian musician. And so as a lover of music, I really resonated with a spiritual path that includes music, because music so much more speaks to the heart than just intellectual formations of words. And I actually found a music teacher, a Hindu teacher, and learned Carnatic music for 10 years and learned to sing and play the Saraswati Veena as well. And I also play keyboards. And when I was in college, I learned the Moog synthesizer, early analog thing with all the tubes and so forth. So Pir Vilayat was also very musically inclined. He studied at the Sorbonne, and he had guest lectures with Stravinsky, and he took cello lessons from Pablo Casals and studied with another teacher named Nadia Boulanger. And so he had this rich background in music, and he considered some of the great classical composers, such as Bach in particular, as spiritual masters who were in touch with the cosmic celebration and were actually bringing this through in their masses. And so sometimes he would have us whirling to Bach this reaching the sort of energy of glorification that comes through that way. And so all of these things were draws. And of course, the Hindu tradition that comes through, the Chistya order, there was all this beautiful meditative music that he would use. He had his wonderful collection that he had collected over the years. And we were shared all those musical riches. And so that was really a strong draw, musical draw. And then, and so with Muzaffer Efendi, also the musical Zikr it's not just chanting, but it uses mystic hymns that are in Turkish that are really beautiful. And so it's another form of this cosmic celebration. So when I met Muzaffer Efendi in 1979, I was told that there was a person named Lex Hixon who had interviewed him on the radio. And Lex Hixon, it turned out, had a spot on WBAI in New York City, in which it was called In the Spirit program. And for about 15 years, he interviewed all of the spiritual teachers and gurus, people like Swami Satchitananda and Kalu Rinpoche, and he was even initiated on the show. He had these live shows that were hours long, and he had Mother Teresa, Alan Watts, and Krishnamurti, and a lot of different rabbis, like the singing Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, Christian scientists, all the work. So he had Muzaffer Efendi on the show, and did several shows. And so at this, when I met Muzaffer Efendi, there was an announcement at one point. It said you can get some of these tapes of interviews with Muzaffer Efendi, and it has the singing of the mystic hymns and stories from Quran and so forth. So I ordered those. And also turned out that Lex Hixon had written his first book recently called Coming Home, in which he had chapters from many of the great world's mystic traditions, including some philosophers and the Zen ox herding pieces, Plotinus, Kierkegaard, Krishnamurti, and Meister Eckhart, and Baba Muhyiddin, who was one of his first spiritual Sufi teacher. So Lex Hixon was, it turned out he was a universalist who was initiated in many different paths, and his passion in life was to delve deeply into each of these paths. And one of his Zen teacher, Bernie Glassman, said Lex Hixon was an interfaith world all to himself. So he first discovered Ramakrishna and studied with Swami Nikhilananda, who was the one who had originally translated the Gospel of Ramakrishna. And he really got into that path of Ramakrishna and Sri Sarada Devi and Mother Kali, and so he really got into the form of God as mother, goddess, and then he went into a Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, the Soto Rinzai fusion form of Zen, and the Gelugpa. Actually, he joined several Tibetan orders and was friends with the Dalai Lama. I interviewed him on the show as well. So fast forward, after I've been in the Sufi order, the Inayati order, for about 8 years, Lex Hixon published a book called Heart of Quran. And this is a book in which he paraphrased the Quran in very loving modern English. And he refers to Allah as ways like the source of being, or the supreme reality, or the source of love. And the idea of this book was to really allow Western readers to get past the sort of literal translations of Quran to feel the love that a deeply spiritual Muslim would feel when they read the Quran in Arabic. And he had an introduction, quite a lengthy introduction, which he spoke about his initiation with Muzaffer Efendi, and it turned out he had become a Khalifa, a Sheik himself, and was leading a Sufi order, the Halveti-Jerrahi Order, in Manhattan, in the Soho region. And he was translating the Turkish ilahis, the mystic hymns, into English. And so all of this, I immediately, my ears perked up when I heard that. It's like, I love Pir Vilayat and the Inayati Order, but this idea of really delving into the mysteries of authentic, the dervish way, appealed to me. And so I checked around. This is all pre-internet, of course, but somehow I found the phone number of the Sufi Lodge in New York and called it. And they said, call back on Thursday night. And Lex Hixon, who we call Sheik Nur, we'll speak with you then. And so when I called, he came to the phone, and first thing he did was offered me a different spiritual name over the phone. And I told him I had been having spiritual dreams of Muzaffer Efendi calling to me. And he said, well, you've received the call, and it's no accident that you read the book and heard the tape and had those dreams. And so next time you come through New York, stop by my house and you can take initiation. So I cleared that with Pir Vilayat and my spiritual guide in the Inayati Order. Got that permission to take hand in the Jerrahi Order. And so Lex Hixon, where Pir Vilayat had thousands of murids, of students, and it was hard to get an interview with him. And so it was rare, like when he came and stayed with us, that was a really rare opportunity to have one-on-one intimate time with the teacher. And sometimes you would get an interview of 15 minutes or something in some city. But Sheik Nur it turned out he was much more accessible, and he said, I'm going to start coming down to Nashville. I'll do little weekend workshops and stay with you, and just call me anytime. We'll discuss your spiritual training. And so there was a new level of spiritual intimacy, like a spiritual older brother, so to speak, with Sheik Nur. And he had only translated about 20 of the mystic hymns at that time. And I had listened to those tapes over the years and really loved all those mystic hymns I had heard. And so I decided to dabble at it myself and sent him a few translations to see what he thought. And he said, this is great. He said, if you don't mind, I may tweak them a little bit. And pretty soon we were collaborating on doing these translations. They're not so much translations, but reworking of the mystic hymns, and also the new insights of modern dervishes come through in these. So sometimes the original lyrics would be thrown out and a whole new set of words would come through. So that lasted for 4 years, 5 years being with Sheik Nur, and then he developed colon cancer and passed away. And so that was about a year before he passed. I had started going to Istanbul and was connecting with the Grand Sheik, who was the successor of Muzaffer Efendi, who died in 1985. Sefer Effendi was the name of the teacher that took over as the Grand Sheik after that. And so by 1994, I'd been in Sufism for 14 years at that time. And when I went to Istanbul to visit the Grand Sheik, he gave me the permissions of a sheikh, and asked me to take the turban of the order back to America and the ijazat, the certification, and have Sheik Nur do the investment ceremony. And so that I was actually the first sheikh that was ordained by Sheik Nur. And then after Sheik Nur passed, I went back to Istanbul and made the Hajj with Sefer Effendi and a group of about 100 dervishes. Went to the pilgrimage, Mecca and Medina, and he reinstated, he put the turban on and did the ceremony again with further permissions, like dream interpretations and the permissions to lead the Zikr ceremony and to give guidance to students and things like that. So after Sheik Nur passed, there was a little bit of a crisis. I was okay. I have no longer really connected with Pir Vilayat except on the inner plane, and my Sheik Nur has passed away, and so I had to decide if I was going to become a spiritual independent or seek guidance elsewhere. And so I did a deep meditation and just asked, went within and asked, what is the next step? What should I be doing? And so the method I used for that was to just ask the question and then become totally silent and blank as much as possible for about a half an hour. At the end of that time, I got a very clear answer. It said, you should write a book. And I thought, well, that's perfect, because I had been given boxes and boxes of audio tapes of Muzaffer Efendi's teachings and the music of the Jerrahis. I had so many recordings, and that, again, this was still before the prevalence of YouTube, where you can download almost any thing you want to. And I was traveling to Istanbul, and I was hearing all these great stories about the Sufis from my sheikh there. And I knew these were stories that had never really been published in English. They were only in Turkish. So I had a whole network of friends who spoke Turkish and could help translate these texts. And so they were very gracious in helping me out with that. And so also the Grand Sheik was very, he supported this idea, and so what I came up with was the idea to write a book in which I followed the growth of Sufism from the time of the Prophet and his first mystical heir, Hazrat Ali, all the way down to modern times through the Halveti-Jerrahi Order, and covering the great early Sufis and show all of the different ideas that each one contributed and how the path grew. And then somewhere in the Middle Ages, start narrowing it down to the Turkish tradition. And so the tradition actually, it started with the Prophet in Arabia, and then it went to Central Asia during the Middle Ages. And there, the Halveti, or they called it the Kawati order, formed in Central Asia and Egypt. And this was a Middle Ages tariqat or Sufi order that specialized in meditative retreats. So a Kawat or Halvet is a spiritual retreat. And so the Sufis were very much into long retreats, 40 days. Sometimes the Mevlevis, the whirling doors, would do a 101 day retreat, 1,001 days. So over more than a year. And when they would come out, just transformed human beings. In more modern times, it's with the sort of speed up of time that we see in the 20th and 21st century. The thing has become much more streamlined, and so people nowadays do much shorter retreats, 3 days or possibly a week. People can do longer retreats if they like, but it's thought that a kind of a series of shorter retreats works for people. And so this Halveti or Kawati order in the Middle Ages moved eventually to Anatolia in the time of Jalaluddin Rumi, the famous Sufi poet and murshid. It finally came to Istanbul with the founding of the Ottoman Empire. Incidentally, there on Netflix now, there's a plethora of Turkish adventure shows. One on Ertuğrul, who was the father of Osman, and one on Osman. He was the founder of the Ottoman Empire. And so this order came to Istanbul, and in the around the turn of the 18th century, another Sufi arose named Pir Vilayat, who was considered the last of the great Sufi pirs. Pir is a founding teacher of an order who starts their own order. And it was a kind of a synthetic order in that teachers from all the different orders, like the Qadri order and the Mevlevi order and the Rafai order, all these different orders, the Naqshbandi order, they all received dreams from their sort of founding peers, telling them to give spiritual gifts to Pir Vilayat-Jerrahi. And so they came, and some of them brought symbolic staff of the order and things like that. And some of them gave things like the Mevlevis gave the whirling, and some gave the circling Zikr, and the standing Zikr. And so the Halveti-Jerrahis became a new order. And that Pir Vilayat-Jerrahi died in 1720. And the Zikr that is the ceremony that's done is one of the richest in all of Sufism. And so this is something that is really a real draw, let's say, for me personally. I love to lead the Zikr and to participate in it, because there's a real, it really is a transformative practice that embodies the divine energies, and also the this union with the people in the circle. So there's this sense of a sort of confraternity of brothers and sisters becoming lost in collective consciousness, so to speak, a kind of unity that an ecstasy that comes through in the Zikr. So that is what the book brings, that order, the Halveti-Jerrahi order, through the silsila. Each of those sheiks is sort of given a little bit of their story and their specific contributions, right down to the time of the closing of the tekkas. And I decided to end the book at that point because it seemed like a good point to start the sequel, which was a biography of Muzaffer Efendi and how he brought it to America. And also he traveled in Europe, in Germany, and other countries, but it took on a new flavor. And there was actually a hadith, a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, that he said, there will come a time in which the sun of Islam that is shining in the East will shine in the West. And so Muzaffer Efendi really felt that this was talking about our times, and that he was the one who had the wherewithal to bring that to America. So in Turkey, where the Sufi orders had been shut down for many years, Muzaffer Efendi had sort of opened them up. And the government gradually in the 50s, 60s started loosening up a little bit on this. And by the late 70s, they decided that it would be good for tourism to export the Mevlevi dervishes and have them come do the turning ceremony in Europe and the United States. And so those were the first Sufi, Islamic Sufis that came to the United States. So before that, the Hazrat Inayati Khan Sufism was kind of the main form of Sufism that existed in the United States. And so after the Mevlevis came and they performed in all the major cities and really drew big crowds and enthusiasm, people started, this was kind of the genesis of people reading Jalaluddin Rumi's poetry. I think Coleman Barks popularized it and put it into very easy to embrace English for people. It's not always, perfect translation, but it's something that people can really relate to and quote. And so it was shortly after that Muzaffer Efendi also had the opportunity to bring the Halveti-Jerrahi dervishes and their Zikr ceremony to the United States. And so they did that, and that's when Sheik Nur first interviewed him, and they went around to the churches and various places demonstrating this and inviting people of all faiths to join the outer circle and make this huge circle of men and women of every persuasion. And Muzaffer Efendi would stand in the middle and start waving his arms, like, come, everyone. And, he said, I'm not looking to go around to the mosque and get fundamentalist Muslims. I'm looking for the people who are open-hearted, that are spiritually seeking from whatever religion. We want to open the doors of union to them and get them chanting the divine names. And that's what I'm here to do. And so to open the hearts of people. And so that was really the spirit in which he brought Sufism to the West. And he was very, he didn't want to export Ottoman Sufism, like with the old forms, like you have to speak Turkish or something like that to get this. And so that's one of the reasons he really loved and appreciated Sheik Nur was because he was such a universalist and really understood divine unity from so many points of view, and immediately recognized that Islam was also bringing the same unity that is brought through the ages, and was very clear on that, and was able to bring that into the American culture and bring it into the English language. And so that was the way in which the more Islamic version of Sufism came into this country. And so that's how these first books came into being. So.
And that book, the last book you're mentioning there is Lifting the Boundaries.
Lifting the Boundaries, yeah. So that's the life of Muzaffer Efendi and the transmission of Sufism, Turkish Sufism to the West. So he wasn't the first person to bring Sufism to the West, and so I don't mean that by the title, but he was one of the people who brought the more Islamic form of Sufism to the West. And so I teach from both of these different Sufi orders. I find them complementary, and so my teaching style is a kind of mixture of the two. And so I try to take the best of both worlds. And so I take I love. Pir Vilayat was a teacher, a master of meditation, and he would lead long meditations, and that's not so much the focus of the Jerrahis, but then they have this rich Zikr and the riches of Islam that is their specialty, and so the two go together well for me. And Sheik Nur actually had joined both orders, so he joined many things, and so he was a person after my own heart.
Fascinating. So I'm curious about your being initiated as a sheikh. Would that be the right word? Initiated? Invested?
Yeah. We use the term bayat, meaning initiation, but yeah, it's or taking hand with lots of ways of but it's actually a ceremony in which you take the right hand of the sheikh, and there's a sort of a transmission of energy, and so that it's thought that the light of that has come down through all of these of prophecy, and through the Prophet Muhammad, and through all of these sheikhs comes through to a greater or lesser degree through the teacher into the student, and so there's that it's a spiritual transmission.
And that's at the point where one joins the order, or the point where one becomes a sheikh?
Well, both. There's you can be a friend of the order, and just you can be a Buddhist or a Jew or Christian, and like to come and join the Zikr and listen to the teachings, and that's it. Or like Rabbi Zalman Schachter used to come up to New York from Philadelphia and join this big Zikr circle with Muzaffer Efendi, and they became great friends as well. And so that's the level of, it's called a muhib, a friend of the order. And then there's the if one gets initiated as a dervish in the order, or a murid in the Inayati Order, that's I think a Persian word for it. Then one is embarking on the path and the training and the personal relationship with the sheikh, and one is given practices at that time. And then becoming a sheikh is not necessarily what happens to everyone. And that's just in the Halveti-Jerrahi Order, there's an emphasis on dreams and dream interpretation that is not in all the other orders. And so there are sometimes mystic dreams that come through that are recognizable in being far beyond the level of usual dreams that one might have. And sometimes these contain profound teachings and symbols. And one is in the Jerrahi order, one tells these first to one's sheik or sheikha, if your teacher is a woman. And they're interpreted, and some of these help the teacher see the spiritual state of the student through the dreams, and of course other indications. But it's usually more of an inner sense rather than from externals, and it's definitely not how intellectual or how much one knows or something like that. But it's an attunement that the sheikh senses with the eye of the heart, so to speak. And so I was surprised when I was made a sheikh because I wasn't really looking for that. And it's usually not a good sign if a person is striving to become a spiritual leader, but it's something that is more given to one, and then it becomes one's karma, one's duty to make use of that and to pass on what one can. And so I found that writing books and sharing with people that way was one of the best ways I had of sharing this. And I felt it was a kind of obligation to some of these teachers that I knew personally and had all these intimate conversations with to pass that those on to other people. And so maybe in a few generations, when none of us are around, people will be looking back to those books as source material. And so it's a privilege to have been given access to all that, those riches. I actually had a dream just about the time I joined the Halveti-Jerrahi Order that I was in a hallway outside of a door where Muzaffer Efendi was, and there was a stand with a great bejeweled book sitting on it, and I was handed this book and told to open it, and it said, "You will be given these the inner secrets of this book," and it had in the margins where Muzaffer Efendi had written annotations, and so it was like a dream that really symbolically showed that that was going to be part of my path.
Are there special dream practices or techniques within that order, or does one simply interpret the dreams that one has somewhat, should we say, naturally or spontaneously?
Whether one is in an order or not, one has to ask for a dream, and one can intentionally ask for a dream on a particular thing, or even if you have a dream that's unclear, you can ask for clarification. And there's actually you can do 2 recounts of salat, of prayer, before you go to bed and ask for a dream. That's kind of a formalized way. But the point is that you put the intention out to have the dream, and maybe put, if you're really wanting to not forget the dream, but have something to write it down by your bedside. And incidentally, I found that I had amazing dreams during Sheik Nur's time, especially when he would be visiting. I would have these mystic dreams like of the Prophet Muhammad or of Jesus. And and so many other people reported the same thing. And then after he passed away, I would dream of him occasionally, but the level of these mystic dreams died down somewhat after his passing. And so there's something about the spiritual influence of the Sheik that evokes this spiritual energy, as some kind of entrainment that brings it through, and the student begins kind of resonating and vibrating in attunement with the teacher. It's sort of like getting their software, so to speak, and so that you really enter the mind and the heart of the Sheik. I also want to mention that with the book after that, When Oceans Merge, that with the first two books I had tried to purvey the kind of traditional Sufism as I received it, and tried to put it into the most updated language and kind of the most loving interpretation after the kind of spirit of my teacher, Sheik Nur. And but then I wanted to also go to this place of universalism and really and what are the far out ramifications of Sufism and and Kabbalah, and where would that take us in a book? And so I found Pir Vilayat was the one that was really putting out those more modern interpretations and kind of trailblazing the Sufi universal path. And so I decided that rather than writing about my own spiritual journey or something, that I would incorporate it by talking about the transmitting what my teachers taught and kind of do it that way. And in that way, I was able to really go into this whole business of Kabbalistic teaching. Of course, the Tree of Life, there's the 10 Sephirot, which correlate very closely with the divine attributes in Sufism, and then showing how these four worlds operate in Kabbalah and in Sufism, and then how scripture can be read on a literal level, and then an allegorical level, and then a mystical level, and then a level that transcends words altogether, such as a saying like the Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao. So there's some that actually point beyond the text itself, and so and also Reb Zalman had this whole teaching that fascinated me about paradigm shifts in religion, how religion had gone through various ages, and this was taught to him in Lubavitcher Hasidus. He was actually born in Europe before World War II, and he and his family had to escape the Nazis. But he became an Orthodox rabbi. But then he started hanging around with Tim Leary and doing acid, and Alan Watts and Gerald Hurd and many more people that don't come to mind. Heschel was one of his teachers, and so he really expanded and was interested in Jewish renewal. And so he showed how, for instance, just to take Judaism as an example, you first had the primitive God of the desert, and the portable sanctuary and the temple, and the Ark of the Covenant, and then in the time of Solomon, it was more solidified into a temple, and then the animal sacrifices came, and that was for hundreds of years. And then there was the second temple was destroyed, and the animal sacrifices with it. Then you had rabbinic Judaism, and then you had the holy days became the temple in time, and God was seen more as the anima mundi, the soul of the universe. And so God traveled through these stages of being very anthropomorphic and out there, and then becoming more like the soul of the universe. And then, so it goes from the different astrological ages. You can see Taurus to Aries, the ram with the chauffeur, and then the Pisces, and you have the two fishes swimming around, and you still have people in dichotomies, black and white, and the opposites, but they don't realize they're unified. They're still swimming in the same sea, and there's a secret unity there. And then the age of Aquarius, the water bearer, is bringing us the feminine values and what Reb Zalman called eco-kosher. Instead of deciding if, certain, gefilte fish or something is emblematic of Judaism, how about checking if nuclear power is kosher, and these sorts of issues. And so there's a new, and of course I mentioned that he very much liked the model of Teilhard de Chardin, that the universe was gradually going from the biosphere, the physical level, to the noosphere. The mental started to accumulate, and then eventually the divine level begins to manifest through us. And so like Vilayat Khan would say, make God a reality and God will make you the truth. So we're becoming in the embodiment of the divine through the limited human form. And so that whole idea that religion has to be renewed in every age and reinterpreted, and modern hermeneutics applied is really an area that fascinated me. And so I wanted to really put that material into that book, When Oceans Merge. And so, and also I put an appendix. I wanted to really go into what would it look like for the Gospels of Christianity to be read on an allegorical level and go beyond the literal meaning. And it really opens up some beautiful things. So I was able to put that as an appendix in the book and bring in not only Sufism and Kabbalah, but the Christian mystic perspective. And so that was that book. And so the next one that's just about to come out is on Lex Hixon, and it's called Living Open Space, the Inner Spiritual Journey of Lex Hixon. And it covers all of his spiritual paths and his ideas of how he didn't want to merge them together, but to really keep the beauty of each mystical tradition alive, and felt that if people dive to the mystical roots of their own tradition, that would be the saving grace. And so in these days when we see so much the rise of nationalism and fundamentalism, which is a kind of a fear response of the esoteric religion, of the exoteric, Sheik Nur didn't think small New Age groups were the answer, but that the main religions have these mystical depths in them. We just need to bring them out. And so this book really delves into that material. And so that will be coming out just in a few months, hopefully in the late spring of 2021.
Fascinating. Gregory, I have so many more questions. I think we could go on and on. We might have to do a sequel, if you don't mind. Particularly your book, When Oceans Merge, I think, has so much interesting themes there that would be really worth a conversation in itself. And I'm very interested also to the degree to which you delved into Kabbalah with Rabbi Zalman Schachter, with whom you studied. And also your new book coming, also very fascinating. So I might have to, well, I'm going to invite you now to do a sequel and dive more into these themes. I think we could keep going. What do you think?
MashaAllah. Inshallah. That sounds like a plan.
Great. Okay, well, I think we're going to have to end it here, but thank you so much. That was extraordinarily fascinating, and I look forward to part 2.
Yeah, and I appreciate your questions, and look forward to seeing you again.
Gregory Blann, thank you very much.
Peace be with you and the audience. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another Guru Viking podcast. For more interviews like these, as well as articles, videos, and guided meditations, visit www.guruviking.com.